What's up, everybody? Brothers, sisters, psychonauts, and seekers of truth. It is Ananka, and welcome to my bazaar. Today, I'm going to be reading the Norse legend of Thor and Geirrod. This version comes from the book Viking Spirit, written by Daniel McCoy. With all that being said, let our story begin. Frigg, like Freya, owned a fine set of hawk wings that had the power to transform their wearer into that bird of prey. One day, Loki, in his usual prankish mood, stole them and put them on. In his assumed form, he gallivanted around the land of the giants, enjoying the thrill of the bracing wind in his wings, and the sight of mountain beyond mountain beyond mountain below. When he flew near the hall of Geirrod, a giant chieftain, curiosity overcame him. He flew in through a window and alighted on a wooden beam so that he could watch and hear what was going on inside. But Geirrod spotted him and ordered one of his men to capture the regal-looking bird. Loki took great pleasure in flitting through the great hall, maneuvering around the many beams and poles that held up its towering walls and ceilings. He would land and wait for Geirrod's men to shimmy up the nearest pole after him, then take off at the last instant before he could be grabbed. But after doing this countless times, he had at last found his feet stuck to the wood as if by magic, and he was caught. He was taken before Geirrod, who noted a sparkle of peculiar intelligence in the bird's eye. Suspecting that the hawk was actually another giant or a god in disguise, Geirrod locked him away in a trunk and starved him for no less than 3 months. When he was finally taken out of the trunk, Loki, still in his hawk form, was at the brink of death. He was in no position to continue playing games, so when Geirrod asked him who he really was, he answered honestly. The delighted Geirrod, for now the already great chieftain had a chance to become even greater. He told Loki sternly that there was one condition upon which his life would be spared, and one alone. He would coax Thor, the foremost enemy of Geirrod's kind, to come to the chieftain's hall without his hammer, his belt that doubled his strength, or any weapon or armor of any kind. Loki, having little choice, agreed and was released. When he arrived back in Asgard, Loki conjured up a cunning rationale to obtain Thor's consent to accompany him on a trip to Geirrod's court unarmed. Along the way, they spent the night at the house of a giantess called Geirrod. When she heard what the destination of her guest's journey was, she became tense. She warned them that Geirrod was crafty and dangerous to have dealings with. Alarmed that her guests were traveling to Geirrod's hall unarmed, she equipped Thor with several of her own possessions, which she assured him would serve him well. Her own belt of might, a pair of iron gloves, and a metal rod. After thanking Geirrod and departing from her house, the two came to the river Vimur, frothing, and had to cross to the other side of the torrential current. Thor put on the belt of might that Geirrod had given him, and Loki clung to Thor by the belt. When the pair had reached the middle of the river, the waters began to rise, and the current became even stronger than before. Thor was now in up to his shoulders, and even with his belt of might, He had to fight hard to maintain his footing. Looking around to see what might be causing the sudden blast, he spied the giantess Gjálp, a daughter of Geirrod, standing upstream from them. He straddled the river, with one leg on the bank and her other leg on the opposite bank, and she was urinating in the water, doubling its flow. Thor recited the proverb that a river should be stemmed at its source, picked up a hefty rock, and hurled it at the gushing giantess. His aim was true, and she fell down dead in her own discharge. Thor then lunged toward a rowan tree growing by the bank of the river Vimur, grabbing onto it and pulled himself out of the raging torrent. After this, to commemorate the rowan's role in saving the thunder god's life, its species was called Thor's Rescue. When Thor and Loki arrived at Geirrod's hall, their host showed them to the barn where goats were kept. There would be great entertainment there, he promised. Once inside, they found that there was a single seat, and Thor was invited to sit on it as a guest of honor. Just when he had gotten comfortable, however, the chair began to rise toward the ceiling. An instant before, he would have been crushed between the chair and the rafters. He took out the rod that Geirrod had given him and pushed against the ceiling with all his strength. 2 hideous snapping sounds followed, and then a cacophony of wild shrieks before the chair tumbled to the ground with a great thud. 2 of Geirrod's daughters, as it turned out, had been lifting the chair up from beneath, and when Thor forcibly stopped its rise, he had broken both their backs. As the 2 lay on the floor, helplessly writhing in unbearable pain, their father invited the guests into the main hall to play games. Bright, warm fires glowed from the sides of the chieftain's otherwise dark hall. Geirrod's face glowed eerily in the dim, shifting light as he proposed a wrestling match between himself and Thor. Naturally, the champion of Asgard accepted. When the fight began, Thor threw himself at Geirrod with utter abandon, but Geirrod swerved to avoid him. In the same motion, he bent down and grasped a pair of tongs. With these, he picked up a bar of glowing hot iron from the fire and hurled it at his opponent. But Thor caught the bar in the iron glove he had been given by Geirrod. When he raised his arm to throw it back at his assailant, Geirrod ducked behind an iron pillar in hopes of saving himself. But the thunder god's arm launched the blazing bar through the iron pillar, through Geirrod's body, through the side of the hall, and into the ground outside, where, at a great depth, it finally came to rest. Thus died Geirrod the giant.